Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of West Berkshire Council's Licensing Committee. I am Rick Jones, and I'm the chairman of the committee. I'm being supported by my fellow members, many of whom are in the chamber. Councillors Adrian Abbs, Jeff Beck, Graham Bridgman, who's joining us remotely, Billy Drummond, Tony Linden, David Marsh, Graham Pask, Claire Rolls, who's also joining us remotely, and Martha Vickers. Sean Murphy and Moira Fraser are the officers supporting us. Sean is in the chamber, Moira is joining us remotely. And we expect also to have David Lucas from James Button & Co. present to talk about the statement of gambling principles on the agenda. Stephen Chard is in attendance as the clerk to the committee and the Zoom host. For any members of the public watching via YouTube, this is what we term a hybrid meeting. Many of the committee members are meeting in the chamber, are sitting socially distanced, and are therefore permitted to remove face masks when seated. Other members, as I've said, are remotely via Zoom. Only the committee members in the chamber can vote on agenda items when those approvals are required. Do members have any questions about the way in which the meeting should be conducted? Members, can I beg your indulgence, please, to observe a minute's silence in remembrance of Peter Argyle, who was a long-standing member of this committee and has sadly passed away. Thank you, members. Can we turn to item 1, the apologies? I understand we have an apology from Councillor Phil Barnett. Are there any others?
No others received, Chairman.
Thank you. Can we look therefore item 2, the minutes? Hopefully you've already had a chance to look at the minutes.
Chairman,
Thank you. Okay, fine. All those in favour? They're passed as a true record.
Chairman, point of order.
Councillor Bridgman.
Councillor Bridgman, sorry.
Chairman, I did put my Zoom hand up. We're missing a set of minutes. We have the minutes of the last meeting, which was a special, but if you go back to the minutes of the special meeting we've just agreed and look for the minutes of the meeting before that, you don't find them because it was a special meeting. So I think we're missing a set of minutes going back to, from memory, July. I think we've just agreed a set of minutes from September, have we not?
Yeah.
The meeting, I can't find the minutes of the meeting before that.
I can help that. But yeah, thank you, Councillor. You're quite correct. There is I believe it's actually late June. They are missing, and they will have to be brought next time. I apologise for that.
Thank you very much for pointing that out, Councillor Bridgman. That will be corrected at our January meeting. Is that acceptable?
Absolutely, Chairman. It's just disappointing that, you know, we've got clearly they've been drafted. Well, I hope they've been drafted. it's just as funny we didn't have 2 sets of minutes to look at tonight.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Members, do you have any declarations of interest for this meeting? No? Great, thank you.
Again, Chairman, I'm raising my Zoom hand rather than interrupting you.
Fine, I can see it. Go ahead.
Chairman, clearly I'm not voting tonight because I'm not in the room, but I think I should say that for those matters which affect Licensing Act 2003. So I think that's items 7 and 9. I am director of 2 different companies, each of which has premises licenses. So I should just, if I was in the room, it wouldn't affect me voting, and therefore I don't think it would affect me if I have something to contribute. I don't think it affects anything, but I just make that personal declaration.
Thank you. Yes, it's best to declare everything you think is possibly relevant. Members, item 4, the forward plan. Do members have any questions or comments on the forward plan? I'll just make one comment on the last item of the January the 31st meeting is dependent upon some research from officers. This refers to a submission by Newbury Town Council for us to consider. But we've asked officers to have a look at what is feasible, what is possible, and advise us accordingly, as the item wasn't provided with very much information. So hopefully that will still go ahead, but we'll have a lot more information about it. No other comments? Councillor Abbs.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to confirm that the lead member will be present for the various items as they come forward. Is that going to be the case?
Can you say that again?
On the forward plan, there is a lead officer and a lead member mentioned. Will the lead members be present for I was going to say cross-examination, but that's not quite the right term, for filling in any gaps that we might need? Or will only be the officers?
We could certainly invite the lead member when it's appropriate. I suspect that for those items that are primarily taxi and private hire, we as members have followed that whole initiative very, very closely. I suspect we know probably a lot more than Councillor Cole has been able to follow.
Indeed.
But I'm happy to invite if you think that would be necessary.
As the lead member, the person that's signing it all off at the end of the day, it would be nice if she attended. It wasn't really a comment on Hillary per se. It was a general comment going forward. But I have to say, Councillor Cole's name is down here a lot. So, yeah, I'm sure she's well aware of everything we're doing.
She has the portfolio. It includes public protection generally. So, okay, thank you. In which case, we'll turn to the first substantial item, which is the adoption of a statement of licensing principles under the Gambling Act 2005. We have, as I said in the introduction, David Lucas from James Button and Company, who's present. I see him now showing up on camera. Who has helped the council significantly in preparing this report. Sean, did you want to say anything in introduction?
No, Chair, just, David, I think is ready to just talk us through the report and answer any questions. And then obviously we'll come back to the representation that was made at the end of it and the recommendations. Thank you.
For that purpose, members, I need to suspend standing orders. Everyone in favour of that?
Well, actually, Chair, before we did, we've done that now. Okay, right, carry on. I was simply going to say, David has presented to, I think, everybody before, and I'd be really interested in knowing any differences between the last time he presented this information to us and now. Maybe it saves himself time and everybody else as well.
Sure. David, did you catch that?
I did. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Abbs. I wasn't going to take up too much of your time in any event, just to confirm that, as you can recall, We were asked, and thank you again for inviting us to provide assistance with the revision of the gambling statement of principles. Forgive me, I'm looking over to the left because I've got another monitor here with your agenda on. You considered the draft statement at the licensing committee meeting on the 21st of June. There were a number of changes, members, but they were mainly to do with formatting. And I think, Councillor Bridgman, the majority that I've got in my note came from your good self. And I can confirm that those amendments, which are summarised in paragraph 6.3 of your agenda, have all been incorporated. It was mainly formatting. There's been no substantive change, members, to the policy that you considered. It was more style and format. So that reformatted policy statement was sent out for consultation. It attracted one comment, and just digressing for one moment, please don't think that the fact it only attracted one comment means that people are not interested. They are. My experience of dealing with these statements is that they don't normally attract a lot of comments. They are considered very, very carefully by the Gambling Commission and operators. I can assure you of that. So the fact that only one comment was made in respect of your draft policy when it went out for consultation doesn't come as a great surprise. The comment came from Public Health and Wellbeing for West Berkshire, and it related to a suggestion that public health considerations play a greater part in your consideration of licensing applications, licensing matters under the Gambling Act. Sadly, whilst that is a laudable comment, it's not something that, strictly speaking, you can consider in relation to gambling matters, because the Gambling Act is quite prescriptive as to the matters that you can take into consideration. As you know, there are 3 licensing objectives. Public health is not one of them. So in exercising your functions, and in particular preparing this statement of policy, public health isn't something that certainly the suggestions that are made in the comment are not something that you can take into consideration. Although I do notice that at the end of paragraph 7.2, it does state that some of the issues raised could be dealt with by changing some operational practices, as long as they do not, and I emphasize do not, impact on the specific duties that you have under the Act and the way in which you must carry out those duties. As I say, it's quite limited, quite prescriptive, I'm afraid. And that, members, is hopefully a relatively succinct summary of how we've got to where we are today and the statement of policy that you now have in front of you. Chair.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. Indeed, thank you, David. I was simply going to say that the document, it reads well. I think it's a good, decent statement of our gambling position. The thing, members, that has been removed from the draft, and you will find in the agenda later on, is the question of delegations. So we're dealing with delegations subtly differently to the way it was proposed in the first place, although we will still deal with delegations. And finally, I actually just something David's just said. I was on a health and wellbeing leadership course for the LGA last week, and indeed someone from Public Health said that local authorities should take cognizance of public health in relation to gambling and licensing, and I somewhat strongly rebuffed that position. So I entirely agree with David about our position vis-a-vis public health, even though it's my portfolio. Yeah, I think this is a really good piece of work, and I commend it.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on this point about what Public Health said in the consultation, the third objective says protecting children and other vulnerable persons from being harmed or exploited by gambling. And in the submission by Public Health West Berkshire, they refer to, for example, the impact gambling has on the poorest in society. before they move on to the point about poor mental health. Are we taking a slightly narrow view here in that if a member of the household, yes, there's something happening here, Stephen, thank you. Bit echoey.
Chairman, there's a point of information. Members need to mute.
Yeah, that's better. Thank you very much. If a member of the house, if the head of the household becomes addicted to fixed odds betting machines and has no, and therefore the family suffers, as the statement says, deprivation, surely that's not a narrow health issue. Surely that's part of the third principle. And I just wonder whether we don't have a bit of leeway to take that into account. Do you see what I'm saying? I think you're interpreting public health rather, and they're not just saying that, they're talking about the great harm and deprivation that can be done through problem gambling to families. To me, that comes under the third principle, I would have thought. Could just be interested to hear your view on that. Because and the reason I'm raising it is I know, I hear what you're saying and what Councillor Bridgman is saying, and when we have hearings and so on, it is quite circumscribed, and we're always given legal advice about that. But I don't see, looking at that principle, why we shouldn't consider the kind of thing I'm talking about. And in fact, we do, because when people make objections to certain licensing applications, they say, I'm worried about the effect that will have on, say, children. And I don't think they just mean the temptation for children to go in and start gambling, which is probably not that likely, but they may be talking about the kind of impact that the Public Health Board has raised. Thank you.
Yeah. Chair, can I come back on that now?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. If it's helpful, Councillor Marsh. I'm not, please don't think I'm trying to belittle issues around public health. I'm not. It's just as Councillor Bridgman has pointed out, we have difficulties because of the way the legislation is basically framed at the moment. When you, as a licensing authority, deal with gambling applications, your only remit is to look at the premises, because the actual wider issues around the operators is something that is regulated by the Gambling Commission. So you're looking at the premises. You have to look at the specific premises that you're dealing with and the way in which they may have an impact on public health in relation to individuals, and there has to be evidence of that. So it's very specific to the premises and very specific to the harm that it causes. Now, I accept that one of the licensing objectives at the moment, I'll come back to that, refers to harm from gambling. But in relation to harm from gambling, it's harm from gambling when you're looking at it from particular premises to specific evidence of harm. In relation to wider issues about the effect it has on families, family members, friends, that's more a general sort of effect of gambling. And that's more a matter for the government to deal with. And you gave the very good example of fixed odds betting terminals, and the government, under their powers, dealt with fixed odds betting terminals because they no longer exist. The government passed legislation, well, amended the regulations relating to gaming machines and basically removed fixed odds betting terminals completely. They don't exist anymore. So that particular issue is addressed as part of those wider powers, if you like, which, as I say, is beyond the remit of licensing authorities. So we're all aware of it, Councillor Marsh, but it's, as I say, the restrictions on the ability that we've got to deal with it within the particular matters that we're dealing with. And just out of interest, the latest information from the Gambling Commission is that the overall, I'm reading from their website, the overall problem gambling rate has decreased significantly. And the moderate risk rate has also decreased significantly. And they're the key facts from their website. So it's interesting. It's still an issue, but it's interesting that those are the current figures. But hopefully that addresses your concern, Councillor Marsh, and just explains where we are as far as licensing and that particular objective is concerned in the way in which it relates to your particular responsibilities under the Act.
Thank you, David. It's a very comprehensive response.
Thank you.
Members, do we have any other questions? Councillor Bridgman, you still have a hand up?
Yep, Chairman, I was just going to come back and say to Councillor Marsh that, of course, most of the applications we concern ourselves with are applications under the Licensing Act, alcohol licensing, premises licensing, and so on and so forth, rather than as far as I'm aware, the single example of an application under the gambling legislation, which we've had to consider. And as those of us who were on that subcommittee discovered, the rules are somewhat different when you're considering a Gambling Act application and a Licensing Act application, as Mr. Lucas points out.
The other thing, thanks, Councillor Bridgman, you just reminded me, what I've meant to say as well is, when I said watch this space, there's a current review of the Gambling Act and things may change, your responsibilities may change, the licensing objectives may change, you may see public health introduced as a specific objective, but that's for the future, probably a white paper beginning of next year, and any changes 2023 is the current timescale, but it's under review.
Councillor Vickers.
Sorry, just to clarify, although we can't deal possibly with these issues under licensing, I assume that we could, if we wished, address this in a preventative way, the issues we're discussing through health and wellbeing or through children's services and in a sort of education raising awareness programme. So there's other ways of actually protecting our young people and informing them. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Pask.
Chairman, thank you. I have no questions. I'd like to thank David for the hard work he's put in on this. I think you're looking for a recommendation as on page 11. Is it appropriate that I make that recommandation now?
I do need to reinstate standing orders.
Oh, you do
when we
indeed. Well,
finish.
may I propose we reinstate standing orders, Chairman?
Has anyone got any more questions for our guest, David Lucas? In which case, yes.
Right. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. So,
well, on page 11, we're asked to note the outcome to consider.
Sorry, we haven't actually reinstated it. You only proposed it at the moment. Do I have a seconder for reinstating standing orders? Sure. Everyone happy? Okay. David, thank you very much for your attendance. It was very helpful. We'll now get into our own debate. And
thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Pask.
Chairman, thank you. I think we have been through this before. I think we've asked the relevant questions. Certainly, I'm happy in my mind that we progress this effectively on to full council, so full council can consider and adopt these measures. So the recommendations on page 11 under 2.1 and 2.2, I would be happy to propose.
Okay. Can I just go through what we as a committee are being asked to do, and I'll come back to you, Councillor Abbs. I think we've already discussed to some extent the outcome of the consultation in terms of the objection. I'm not sure we've necessarily reached a conclusion on that, but we've certainly discussed it. We are asked to consider any amendments needed to be made to the draft of statement gambling principles, and I don't believe we've identified any of those yet. We're being asked to delegate the authority to the Service Director of Development and Regulation to make any minor corrections to the statement prior to inclusion in the full council agenda. And finally, to recommend to full council that the statement be adopted subject to any amendments that we agree. So, Councillor Abbs, you wanted to say something?
I was actually going to second Councillor Pask's proposal, but however, having said that, you've just read out that we give the service director the right to change things, and considering this last round was simply a formatting exercise, I'm not sure he needs that power. I wouldn't be particularly happy letting someone change it after we've all agreed that there aren't any changes needed. enough to say. But anyway.
Murphy, would you like to?
Chair, I think we can be fairly confident there won't need to be any changes. I think that was probably just a kind of fail-safe position in case something had slipped through. But I mean, I think given the amount of scrutiny this item has had and the consideration by the committee and the work that's been done by officers and by the people that have advised us, I'm pretty confident it won't need any changes prior to going to council.
So that's just
So therefore, Chairman,
an insurance policy.
If the proposer is willing to take that small amendment to his proposal, then we could maybe vote on it. Okay.
So you're proposing which small amendment? Sorry,
That the officer doesn't have the ability to make minor corrections. It is presented as we have approved.
Chairman, I don't think that is what our officer said. I think my interpretation of what we've just been told is it's exceedingly unlikely. But I think we do need the flexibility if there is something in between our meetings that our respected and experienced officer needs to amend in a small way. I think he needs that flexibility. We've been assured it's unlikely. So I don't think, I wasn't wondering whether Councillor Abbs was actually trying to make an amendment to it or whether he'd be happy on that basis.
Well, to be honest, we've just heard the officer say there's very unlikely there'll be any need for the amendment. This has been scrutinised a bunch of times. I think this is the third meeting I've been at least where we've gone through it, and it leaves me uncomfortable letting anybody have the ability to make minor changes or otherwise to a statement that we've all approved.
However,
I mean, if it was a typo
it
or
is
something,
pretty in many of the reports that go to full council, that provision is a fairly usual standard provision because we don't want to bring it back, have to wait for a committee to change one word in the report. Do any other? Yes, I can see some hands. Councillor Bridgman.
That was precisely what I was going to say, Chairman, from the floor, as it were. That you want a fallback. After all, full council is going to consider this. So if there was an amendment that Councillor Ads didn't like, he could bring that up in full council and say, this amendment, we didn't agree it in the licensing committee. This is so massive that it should go back round the round. And I would support that. I think, we could note that officers could note that there was a missing a missing full stop or something, and would want to change that without having to come back through the round. So I don't think this should be written in stone. But obviously, if there were any amendments, those amendments, I would say, we should ensure that any amendment between now and full council is identified by officers in the report that goes to council, so that any amendment between this meeting and full council, the members of this meeting are fully appraised of.
And I'm happy to support that comment because it's the difference that's hard to spot all the time.
Yeah, I agree. So can we make that slight amendment to recommendation C?
Chair, I see no problem with that. That we just feed that into the full council report in due course if there are any. But as I say, I don't anticipate there should be any.
I'm happy with that, Chairman.
Thank you very much, members. In which case, I'd like to move to a vote on the recommendations. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried. Right, we turn to the item on Hackney carriage tariffs, which again is a subject that we've talked about on many occasions. I believe we've reached hopefully a satisfactory conclusion. Sean, would you like to?
Chair, this is Moira is going to pick this report up.
Fine.
I mean, just to say, as you've all pointed out, we've been looking at this matter for quite some considerable time. Agreed at the meeting that we'd go out to consultation. We ran the consultation for 28 days rather than the prescribed 14 days. We had one representation, and that's set out in the appendix to the report. And what we're now asking is that this committee makes a recommendation to the executive about changing the tariffs, which amounts to a circa 5% increase. Officers would, however, like to make one other change to the proposal. At the moment, the implementation date that we're recommending is the 2nd of December. Given the discussion that we had at the taxi liaison group and the views of the trade about wanting to try and expedite this process, we would like to change that implementation date to the 19th of November, so the day after the executive, if that's at all possible. That will give the taxis, because they can't change the meters until the implementation date has come to pass. So we would like to try and get them to be able to do that as soon as possible, with a view to having the new tariffs in place for the 1st of December, if that's what the executive is minded to recommend.
Thank you, Maureen. Members, we're being asked to, on page 63, to consider 3 things, and under 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3, to consider the objection that we received to the consultation, to recommend to the executive with reasons that the table of affairs at Appendix D comes into effect as set out, or to propose a modification for the executive to consider. You've also got the recommendations to the executive, which confirms what Maura just said about the 19th of November as the implementation date. Do you have any questions or items and contributions to make? Councillor Abbs.
Thank you. I was simply say I support officers' request to bring the date forward to as soon as possible, because the taxi trade has been on its knees for quite a while now. So.
Thank you. Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, it possibly won't surprise you that if I was in the room, I would be proposing 2.1, 2.2, 2.4, 2.5 and 2.7, pretty much along the lines of Councillor Abbs just said, because we have gone through this with a very fine-tooth comb. We have fully consulted. There was one single objection to the proposal. I think the trade are in favour of it, and I think the sooner we bring it in, the better. So, Chairman, if I was in the room, I would be speaking in favour and making a proposal to you.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Councillor Linden.
Chairman, I'd like to propose officers' recommendations in full.
Okay.
Chairman, I'm very happy to share.
Okay. There are no other comments. Are all in favour of the recommendations?
Chairman, point of order. I think you need to decide between 2.2 and 2.3 and 2.5 and 2.6.
Thank you for pointing that out. You're right. You are proposing 2.2 or 2.3, Councillor Linden?
Sorry, just going back a minute.
I presume 2.2.
Yes, 2.2.
2.2. So we are therefore not proposing 2.3.
And Chairman, I would suggest or 2.6.
And I'll remove 2, and I'd remove 2.6, Jim.
Yep. Okay. All in favour again? Just making sure we got that right. Thank you. That is also
Chairman for that.
I was hoping that item wouldn't take long after all the debate of hours that we've had in the past on that subject. So time to item 7. The scheme of delegations associated with the statement of gambling principles. You have a report starting on page 89 of your pack. We are being asked to approve the delegations to the licensing subcommittee and officers as set out in the appendices, and to delegate authority to the monitoring officer to make any changes to the constitution that arises from that. Members, do you have any, Sean, do you want to make any comments about it in introduction?
Just to say that obviously most of the delegations, as members will be familiar, that operate for the council actually come through full council. The Licensing Act is different to that in the in the sense that the Licensing Act itself sets up the concept, I suppose, of the licensing authority. And the licensing authority basically, obviously, as the council exercises its licensing powers through the committee. Therefore, it is for the committee basically to determine what delegations they give themselves to the subcommittee or to officers. The Gambling Act 2005 actually came in obviously a couple of years after the Licensing Act, but actually, I suppose, builds on the same principles that are set out in the Licensing Act actually and adopts the relevant provisions. So again, it delegates to the licensing committee the functions of the authority under the Gambling Act, and then it is for the licensing committee to subsequently delegate those functions that it sees appropriate to either a subcommittee or to officers. There are some matters which are reserved to full council, which are identified in the scheme of delegation, one of which, for example, you've discussed today, which is the adoption of the policy, and that would be the same as the policy under the Licensing Act 2003. They are included in the scheme of delegations really just for completeness to show where they actually fit, but in due course, obviously. But in fact, what you're being asked to do today is just to consider the delegations really to the subcommittee and to officers. I have had discussions with Councillor Bridgman about where this will fit in to the wider constitution for completeness and visibility, and I know that's something that Councillor Bridgman is looking at, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Bridgman, you have your hand raised.
Indeed, and just to follow up what Sean said, I mean, members, you may recall that there was, in the original statement of gambling principles that was drafted by David, there was a list of delegations, and that brought it to light that there was a contradiction between the scheme of delegations as there should be in both the Licensing Act policy and, if I can call it, I know it's a statement of gambling principles, let's call it the Gambling Act policy. And this has now neatened and bottomed out that question so that the delegations are effectively taken out of the control of council for the most part. But in order to be consistent, they're not going to be in either of the statements of principle, but rather they will sit within the Constitution so that anyone going to the Constitution can see who is delegated what. But in this case, the delegations are to the committee for the most part, or to officers by the committee or subcommittee, and that you can see exactly what they are within the report. But Chairman, a decent amount of work has been done in order to tidy this up, and that will flow through into the Constitution Task Group as we look at the scheme of delegations in due course. But I commend the work that's been done by officers to get this tidied up. It's a good piece of work.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Councillor Abbs.
Thank you, Chairman. To be honest, I was simply going to propose that we accept these recommendations because, as Councillor Bridgman's just pointed out, that is my recollection that this needed to be tidied up, etc., etc. So I'm quite happy to move forward with recommendations as laid out in 2.1 and 2.2.
Before I ask for a seconder, are there any other questions or comments from members? Okay. Could I have a seconder to that then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All those in favour? Thank you very much, members. That's unanimous. We're moving through the agenda nicely. Item 8, members, is the licensing annual report. Would you like to introduce it, John?
Chair, I'm happy to introduce this. So this is the report that comes to the committee every year, which really gives you a kind of summary of the activity, not just of the committee, but of the licensing service. This will be the last one, I think, that we'll be looking to bring at this meeting in November, October, the autumn meeting, and we're planning in future years to bring this in the summer, which is obviously the first meeting after the end of the financial year. I'm not quite sure why it does come so late, but we are planning to bring it forward from next year onwards. It's a report that summarises really the activity, as I say, of the committee and of the service and of its subcommittees. And you'll see in the report there is a mention of 2 hearings that took place in the 1920 year. But also there is a summary of the activity as well in terms of the granting of licences. And I think, interestingly, a summary of the number of licences that that were basically the end of that period. Now, obviously, this has been an unusual period in many ways, but obviously, but for the licensing trade, it has had the impact of COVID has been significant, and also for the service. And for the first time, obviously, the report actually draws upon the experiences of both the service and the trade in responding to the COVID pandemic. You will see from the appendix at Appendix A, I believe you can see the impact in terms of the numbers of licenses. So you will see that there's been a fall off, for example, in hackney carriage vehicles, private hire vehicles, and obviously drivers, and accordingly. But that's not the only area that has been affected. I mean, there have been other areas, for example, like animal boarding establishments, which have reduced as well at 21. Sorry, at the end of March 21. So you can see that's the impact, really, basically, of the pandemic actually coming through into the licensing sector itself. So really, just to say that it's a report you get every year. It summarises the work of the service, and I'm happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. Members, we're simply asked to note this report, but obviously Sean will take some questions. Councillor Linden.
Yes, Chairman, what I should have mentioned on interest, and I don't think it is an interest, my next door neighbour at number 9 does keep dogs for a short period of time as a commercial business, so when people go abroad or whatever. So I should have mentioned it, Chairman. My apologies.
Okay, thank you. Better late than never. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair. I mentioned this last year and the year before, and I do know that I do appreciate that it's been a very difficult year for these businesses. I think it's disappointing that another year has gone by without, as far as I can tell, any contribution whatsoever by this committee to reducing carbon output, bearing in mind the council's environment strategy. And of course, we do have an opportunity to do this through the hundreds of vehicles that are licensed. And I do recall we had one meeting with the trade, and they were, you know, there was some interest. They pointed out the difficulties of going to fully electric vehicles. There was some interest, though, and a comment was made by the drivers that there was nowhere to charge, so they would like to see electric chargers at the taxi ranks. And I just think that as hopefully we move out of this COVID period, or the worst of it, perhaps we could try next year to do something about this. And I've been arguing, as other members have, for some sort of scheme whereby it would benefit the trade for individual drivers or businesses to switch over. And they're going to have to sooner or later. We know that. They're not going to be able to buy diesel taxis in a very short time. So I wonder whether, as a council, we can give more leadership and more encouragement to these, as I say, hundreds of vehicles, and get them to switch over to something more environmentally friendly. And you know, it's kind of depressing when, it's understandable, but when you walk around Newbury, say, at night, and all these diesel vehicles are sat there with their engines running to keep the drivers warm, you know, you don't need to do that. It's much easier to keep an electric vehicle warm at night. And so that would just be one advantage in terms of emissions. But I do think that we should make more of an effort in this area next year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. I will come back, but after the comments from other people, Councillor Abbs.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I mean, I do note, and it's something that we raised. Councillor Bridgham is likely to know this number off the top of his head, but an X number of meetings ago, shall I say, about when we were talking about the effect of COVID and finding a way of helping, an immediate way of helping the taxi drivers, especially. The numbers show that we're down 49, I think it is in total, various forms. I do think it was a pity we weren't able to do more at that time, but that's more of a general statement. However, I would very much like to support Councillor Marsh's statement about charging points, and I think we have put proposals forward in other formats to actually have something placed near where they are in the centre of towns and so on and so forth. It's an essential part of giving them the ability to switch to cleaner energy. And so anything we do as infrastructure-wise to help that, it can only be positive. I don't think it's directly related to this committee, however, to do that. That's more to do on the environmental and other bodies. So it's more of a statement that, I think we all would like to see action, and maybe we could have a note from this licensing committee to the rest of the council to say, please start to take action on infrastructure so we can start doing things to help, especially the taxi trade, go the greener route. So, thank you.
I understand what you say. Maura, you have some response?
Say that yeah, in terms of the green kind of initiatives, at the last taxi trade meeting that we held, we had 2 items on the agenda, and I was going to talk about those when we get to that, but we can do that now. We had colleagues from the environment delivery team come along and speak to the trade. We are arranging a day on the 17th of November for the trade to come along and have there's a sort of a panel with like myth busting around using electric vehicles and taxis. They've got it on the panel. There'll be a taxi driver who works in London and is using an electric vehicle to try and have a sort of a peer-to-peer conversation with the drivers. And then after that, there'll be an opportunity for the drivers to come along and test drive vehicles as well. Take up we've had about 10 of the drivers come forward, and there's space for 20 of them. So we're hoping that will be fully subscribed by the time the event takes place. We also had our new air quality officer come along and speak to the taxi drivers about the air quality and the anti-idling campaign that we've got going along. So we are working with the trade, and we are working closely with the environment delivery team to try and address some of these issues as well.
Thanks, Maura. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, I would say that whilst I fully endorse the principles that you're both promoting, there has been a report of that meeting. The meeting was available for any member to attend, and the principal agenda item was all to do with electric vehicles and air quality. So I would ask you to stay up to date so that you actually do understand what the committee is doing. Okay.
No, I was unable to make it, and I do appreciate that, Chair. I think when I said at the start we've done nothing, I meant there's no outcome as yet. In other words, that there are no electric vehicles plying their trade on the streets of West Berkshire. But I did say we've had meetings. There have been talks with the trade, and I welcome that. Thank you.
But the reports from those meetings do explain exactly why the trade is so reluctant, and it's not through lack of pressure from West Berkshire for them to adopt those principles. And there are lots of things outside of our controls that prevent them or make them reluctant to do it, which we are trying to do the best that we can. Councillor Abs.
Yeah, just to correct something I said earlier, I used the number 49. In fact, it's 84 when I was referring to the number of losses of licensing across. So it's more significant than I first indicated.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions on the report? I have 2 small questions, if I may. You refer to the new single case management system, which has enabled us to propose later in the agenda quite favourable fees and charges. How is that system implementation going? And the reason I ask is the council's experience of new systems is not always fantastic.
I have to say, Chair, it's been a challenge, particularly with the and it's easy to talk about COVID a lot, but obviously the staff that we would have liked to have assigned to some of that work have also been engaged. Basically, the service had a significant role to play in the response to COVID. That said, the good news is that the system is still on target to be delivered by the date that we've got for February. Our plan is to ensure that it's fully operational for the 1st of April so that we don't have any legacy systems in place by the time we start the new financial year. And I'm pretty confident that we will be there. Testing is transfers of data and all of that kind of work is underway. We will be inviting the trade actually just to talking about the new system. We will be inviting the trade, and we have invited the trade, I think it's fair to say, Moira, to assist us with the testing of the system as well to make sure that it works for them. But in short, I'm confident that it'll be ready by February and certainly by the new financial year.
Great, that's very good news. Thank you for that. I found it's a good, concise summary of the activity and the situation. So, as I say, there's no vote on that item. We're just noting it. So, thank you very much. And we'll move on to item 9, which is the fees and charges proposal.
Chair, would you like me to introduce this as well?
Yes, please.
Fees and charges, as members will know, is a matter for full council. But the committee has certainly for a few years now played a role in the fees and charges process. So this is effectively, just to explain the process, the fees and charges are proposed by the Joint Public Protection Committee, and the Joint Public Protection Committee do that as part of the mandate that they have under the agreement that's in place between the authorities, along with the revenue budget. The next stage is that they come to this committee for consideration and also to trigger what would be the statutory consultation, should the committee be happy to do so. Any representations on the statutory consultation element of it, which is set out in the report, will come back to the committee, but ultimately then the fees and charges will continue on their journey all the way through to full council in due course when the budget is set for the next financial year. Just to pick up really the key point that the chair has just raised. So we have been moving over to a single system. So currently the service is run on in fact 3 legacy systems for the Joint Public Protection Service, or for the Public Protection Partnership. In due course, we are moving to not just a single system, but a vastly improved system in terms of service delivery and service efficiency. So what this will allow in particular the trade to do is to make those applications fully online, to make the payments online, to ultimately send out reminders, for example, to the taxi trade about MOTs or insurance certificates, the kind of thing which takes quite a lot of officer time and intervention by officers currently. Obviously, it requires the trade to use the new system, or the various aspects of the licensed sectors to use the new system, but we're very hopeful, basically, once they can see the benefits of that they will. The upshot of all of this is that we have substantially reworked the discretionary fees and charges, which will be going to council in into full council, at the end of February, beginning of March, as part of the budget setting proposal. And we do believe as a service that there are some efficiencies which will result in savings, which, because of the nature of the preparation of discretionary fees, will be passed back to the trade. So what you will see in the schedule to this paper is a proposal for a set of fees, a number of which have been reduced, particularly around things like taxi, private hire vehicle fees, small adjustments to operator fees, and some other adjustments to other licenses, where we believe the amount of time spent on administration of those licenses will be reduced. The second thing just to say is that we have been in discussions with the trade, and particularly the taxi trade, around some of the additional costs associated with the driver's licenses, and in particular the courses that are required as part of the council's conditions in relation to disability awareness and safeguarding. Currently, those courses are provided by external providers, and the taxi trade have to pay for those courses directly with the provider, and that is in addition to their driver's fee. The efficiencies that we've managed to produce in relations to the driver's fees has meant that we're now able to absorb the cost of those courses, and in due course we will be providing those courses ourselves in-house. We're getting staff trained up to provide those courses to the trade, which has meant that the driver's fees have stayed pretty well static. I think there may be £1 difference or something like that. Finally, we've also reworked some of the other minor fees, and based on time, effectively what we've done is separated out, for example, the cost of the time that we spend on a particular activity and the disbursement. So you'll see, for example, a replacement plate for a vehicle will have a time period associated with it, and then there will be the cost of the plate, for example, just using that as one example. So what I would say is, I think overall this is a good news thing for the trade. They have had a difficult period, as many members have already recognised. We are looking to reduce a number of the discretionary fees, but we're also looking as a service to gain some of the benefits and efficiencies that arise from the new system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. That's a very good explanation. Members, the recommendations to us are set out on page 133 and 134. There are 6 of them. The first says that apart from taxi trade and private hire fees, the other fees go forward as normal as part of the council's fee setting process. But for the particular ones related to the trade, we are asked to approve the various aspects of the consultation, and also that if there are no objections received from that consultation, that the fees are included in the February 21 executive and the March council papers as normal. Do you have any questions, please? Councillor Plask.
Chairman, thank you. I read this with great interest, and I thank Mr. Murphy for giving us some explanation. Could I just pick more or less at random? I've got in front of me dog daycare, home boarding, and so on, where a reasonably significant granting fee looks like it could be reduced. Minimum 4 hours at, I'm looking at one, for example, the old price was 354, minimum 4 hours at 236. I mean, the obvious layman's question to that is, how long does it normally take? I mean, is this actually a fee reduction? Does that impact on the council's budget? It's clearly, hopefully, good news for those applying for such licenses. But I have no idea how long it takes for such a license to be granted. When it says a minimum of 4 hours, does it take 10, in which case it's a significant hike? Could I just be guided a little, please?
Sorry, Councillor Bass, which page is that on? May I ask? I'm just trying. Oh, I found it. Sorry.
Well, that was 143, the one I just landed on, as I said, at reasonable random.
Yeah, I think what we're saying with fees like that is that we believe that it would take a minimum of 4 hours should everything be okay. But obviously what we're suggesting is that actually, rather than everybody pay a uniform fee for example, somebody that takes much longer because there may be issues or other things that we need to do in relation to that license, that individual actually pays, if that makes sense. So we are trying to make the fees as fair as possible like that. But by and large, basically, for most of the fees on the schedule, in terms of discretionary fees, there is some degree of reduction in there. Just going back to the overall position about budget, because I think that's clearly an important one. It's not often we reduce fees. What we have been doing is, you'll be aware that obviously there are some changes to the Public Protection Service as a result of Woking and Borough bringing some of the elements back in-house and although commissioning some of the elements back from the shared service. we have held open a number of vacancies and things like this with a view to the fact that we would need to rework some of this basically in due course when the new system was in place. So we will look to balance the budget overall without any further demands on the authorities by basically the reworking of the structure of the service, if that makes sense. Can I just say one more thing, Chair, that I did meant to mention? So this was the final year, really, I suppose, of the unification of the fees with Bracknell Borough, so Bracknell Forest. So we have been working basically over time to ensure that we have a uniform set of fees. One of the areas, the last actually, I think probably more, there are one or two unusual ones that only apply in Bracknell, things like hairdressers and things like that. But one of the last main remaining areas was around street trading consents, where we both had different fee structures and different periods, some individual different periods that applied and different fees for those periods. What we've got now for the first time is a combined set of fees, which by and large are still represent full cost recovery for West Berkshire, but actually do give a wider range of options in terms of the period that people can apply for those consents. We felt that was helpful at this time to give a wide range of options, particularly as people may be looking to, for example, try new businesses and things like that, new business opportunities. But I hope that's helpful explanation. Thank you.
Very helpful. There was a lot to wade through on this, Chairman. I was just interested. I think Mr. Murphy's point that should, going back to my example, there be issues in a particular establishment, it's only right that they, of course, should resolve those if there is an increased cost in that, provided that overall, the point I was trying to draw out, which I think I'm satisfied with, is that there does appear to be some reduction in fees, which is, I'm sure, going to be very welcomed by many businesses.
I think
I'll be interested to hear what other members have to say then.
Are there any other comments from any other members? Questions? Thank you. You've actually answered the question which I was going to ask about the impact on the budget and how that will be dealt with, which you mentioned on page 138, but you'd answered that question. So if there is nothing else, can I ask for a proposer for the recommendations on page?
Happy to propose, Chairman.
I'll be happy to second Chairman Officer's recommendations.
Members, all those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Abstentions? Right. Thank you very much. That's passed. Final item on the agenda, members, is the meeting report from the taxi trade, which we did refer to slightly earlier. Moira, is there anything else you wish to add to that?
No, nothing to add, Chairman.
Councillor Abbs.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to bring members' attention to 4.8, 4.9 of the report. And it kind of refers back to what we were talking to earlier, because it gives us those numbers that you wanted us to pay attention to. The one that catches my eye is that 60% of the drivers are intending to change their vehicles within the next 3 years. So we have an opportunity to accelerate that. What are the barriers for them to doing that? One of the barriers mentioned is infrastructure we discussed earlier. However, I did not want to interfere with the setting of license fees during the process. I think that's all done and we'll see that at council. However, I would really like this committee to start looking at a new category of license that basically encourages more than the 20% that will actually choose an electric vehicle in the next years to make it the complete 60%. To do that, we could give them an incentive by obviously removing the license fee associated that would normally pay for a couple of years. It's only a small contribution because we do understand the cost of electric vehicles are significantly higher. However, if we also look at the number of miles associated with each of the journeys, most of them are pretty small. So actually plug-in hybrids are a viable alternative because a lot of the plug-in hybrids will actually cover most of the short journeys under electric. So we get the advantage of the air quality, et cetera, even if we don't go all the way to full electric. Now, full hybrids, mild hybrids are significantly cheaper than full electric. So we could create something in combination with the trade that really accelerates and helps us all towards our climate emergency target. So that's really all I wanted the members to focus on. There is significant things that we could do here, which won't cost us an arm and a leg to actually encourage things to go faster. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. Thank you for those comments. We'll make sure that they are included in the minutes of the meeting. And we should obviously discuss that at some stage in the future.
If I may say so, ASAP, please, Chairman, if we can get it on the agenda to go into some detail, that would be great. I'm happy to bring a proposal forward if you'd like.
There is another meeting with the taxi trade. We're proposing to meet with the taxi trade twice a year from now on. Moira, do you remember when the next meeting with them is?
I think Chairman, it's the 23rd or 24th of January, but I'll double check that for you.
Okay, so we could certainly raise that with them.
Would you mind if I was
suggest
invited
that we
along,
put it
Chair?
as a standard item on the trade liaison meeting agenda. We've raised the subject with them. We've started the conversation. Moira, as you said, as you heard, has set up a day for them to experience the vehicles and answer their questions. So I think it's a campaign rather than a specific action. It's a process that we have to go through. So.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at a full pull push campaign where we basically give an incentive as well as information.
Okay,
So,
right. I think you need to propose the sort of incentives that you were talking about and let officers consider that. Yeah.
Thank you. If I may be invited along to the meeting with the trade.
You always are.
Am I? Excellent. Moira, could you please make sure I have an invite?
Great. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks. That, I think, means that all our business is now concluded, members. Thank you very much for your contributions and your attendance. I close the meeting at 5:37, I think.